Is Sony in danger of burning itself down, even amidst gaming's most loyal fans? With all the recent crossplay stuff in the news, we have to ask ourselves the question, is Sony starting to boil over? For the longest time, I would say that Sony's platforms were definitely very gamer-centric. Sony has been synonymous with providing really great first-party exclusive games and providing support to their player bases, and of course goodwill as well. You don't hear about them in the news very often, and when you do, it's usually good news, such as a new game announcement or a feature announcement. But recently we've seen Sony in the news for crossplay, and it's getting out of control. So much so, in fact, that the biggest publications in this industry, one of them being IGN, is calling them out flat out. Normally we don't see institutions like IGN aggressively call out companies for doing bad stuff because, well, they have relationships with those companies and they want to hold on to that, especially since they gain so much from those relationships. Sony pays them to do post-release content, Sony pays them to do pre-release content, they give them review codes, they invite them to E3 events, they do conferences, interviews, all sorts of stuff. Stuff you don't want to jeopardize by bad-mouthing the institution that you're working with. Why would you want to jeopardize all of that, plus more stuff like getting insider information, being the first ones to be able to release their content? You add all that stuff up, and it's a relationship you don't want to F with. Usually because of this, we don't see that kind of behavior. We see big institutions like IGN, GameSpot, play it rather safe and soft, because they don't want to give up benefits by talking down to the company that which supplies them. This is the same reason you see many YouTubers out there and many press outlets out there reviewing games and supplying gaming information, playing it rather safe, saying good things, putting the game in really good light, because they don't want to jeopardize the relationship beyond that point. Of course, there are exceptions to this, and we saw a bunch of them last year, especially with Shadow of Mordor and the DLC debacle, then Battlefront 2 as well, but by and large, most outlets right now do restrain from this outrageous behavior to make sure that these relationships stay intact and stay healthy, because they are long-term relationships after all. And that's because this industry has become lately rather cutthroat, and when I say rather, I mean extremely cutthroat. If you're not the first, then you're definitely the last. So if you don't have these relationships with big companies out there in a favorable light, you're not going to be one of those people. Therefore, you're not going to make it in the industry. So while I do find it's kind of surprising that big companies out there are going after Sony in this fashion, it does make sense because it is such an important element to being a gamer in 2018. As we all right now, it's become more and more normal to see crossplay between Nintendo, Sony, and Microsoft products and the PC Microsoft products as well. This was not the case for a long time. During the PlayStation 3 era and leading up to the PlayStation 4, it was a very much black and white culture in video games. You were either a Sony player or you were a Microsoft player, then you had the Nintendo players on the side. Not to say that that system was any less good than the Sony and Microsoft systems, it was just a different flavor. But whatever side you were on, you were pretty much on it. Several years later, we did see the implementation of crossplay and the integration of crossplay with many of our favorite games. So you saw Sony players playing with Xbox players, playing with Nintendo Switch players or PC players as well. It was a great time because you didn't have to own all the systems to play with your friends. And then shortly after that, we saw the implementation of account-wide practices among different systems, and this is where it gets really beneficial to the consumer. Gamers can now have a single account for a product or a service that spans more than one console. So you could buy items for a video game in an in-game store, or you could have progression through a game in any one particular system, but then have it carried over to all your other systems that you do play that single game on. And that's really beneficial, especially with the growth of the free-to-play game and the mobile game, in which you paid for progression and you paid with your time and your money to get to various elements in the game. So players weren't wasting money and time and resources buying items for one platform and then having to buy them again for another. Crossplay would solve this by having intra-connectivity for the same game among different systems. So it was a great time to be a gamer. You played a game on one system, you put money into that game or a product, then you could reap the benefits of that by switching to another system on the same account. So it's a win-win for gamers and console makers alike. Gamers get more options, and console makers get exposure to their system with players who don't even have their console. But Sony doesn't believe this to be true. In fact, they staunchly defend any integration of crossplay with their system, and in many cases, they straight out restrict the process altogether. They've done it with many games, the most popular being, of course, Fortnite and the upcoming Fallout 76. They believe that they are so far ahead in the console market, and it's actually true, they are ahead of Xbox 2-1, that they don't need to give concessions and benefits to players who want crossplay who don't own Sony products. From a workload, business, and monetary perspective, you might be able to swing a case for this. However, there has been some news out there recently that has said, well, it's not that big of a deal to integrate crossplay between multiple systems. While Sony is saying it costs a lot of money, it's too much hassle, there's a lot of work involved, we just can't afford it, Microsoft went on record by saying that's a bunch of horse manure. That's not true whatsoever. It's very easy, especially because it's on the development side. This was new news to a lot of gamers out there, including myself, who did think crossplay integration was incredibly taxing on both the publishing and the development side. So when this news came out, Sony got painted in a bad light, and they basically got caught with their hand in the cookie jar, and their image has suffered recently. It's quite embarrassing to have a company out there that we basically looked up to for such a long period of time have such a defiant attitude to what makes video games great and sharing video games as a whole, especially among different consoles, because it does benefit gamers across the world. It almost seems like Sony views themselves as kind of a castle on top of a mountain, basically, walled up against the rest of the world, self-contained and self-isolated from the rest of the ecosystem out there. And, well, many gamers out there don't think that's a great way to do business, especially because gamers are your primary source of revenue, and you gotta make us happy. You gotta keep us happy too. And for a long time, I would say Sony was definitely the console for the serious gamer out there. Yes, Microsoft has had some great systems, and they definitely have provided great games as well, but they have kind of gone down the technology route, so many serious gamers out there do look to Sony as their primary source of gameplay. And when things come up like this, where it's clear that the decision should go one way and Sony is defending the opposite, it makes gamers worried about the future for Sony. And the future for Sony and Microsoft is only a few years away with their new systems. So that opens up a whole new can of worms. Which company is going to be shown in the best light leading up to that moment so that gamers will go with that system? Which system is going to have the right attitude? Which system is going to have the best games? And which system is going to have the best version of backwards compatibility, if that at all? I think those are the three main talking points that are going to be floating around the minds of gamers when they choose which system to buy next generation. And if Sony continues down this dark rabbit hole of anti-consumer welfare and best practices such as not enabling crossplay with gaming's most popular products, it's not going to look good for them in the future, I can guarantee that. Because this industry is not just based off games, it's about the companies that provide them too, their attitudes, their ethics, their morals, how they flesh out their systems with the best practices. And one of them has to do with consumer welfare, and this is just one example. How do gamers feel about your product and your company? That's the question that goes under the radar way too much in this industry, because there are so many controversies that pop out of nowhere where companies then have to justify themselves and to change business practices because they have done the wrong thing. This seems to be one of them, and it's surprising because this is Sony, for God's sakes. I feel the bad blood right now as a Sony loyalist, and I feel the slime and the sour taste in my mouth at this entire situation, and I just want them to just do the right thing and come on board and say, you know what, this may not be good for the company 100%, but it's good for the gamer, and that's really important. And the last thing I'll say is, this is not gonna just poof go away. Time and time again, gamers have taken a stand on what they want and what they don't want in this industry, and if they don't like a practice that's being put out there, they will spread it like a tidal wave across the internet and make the change happen themselves by way of just never giving up. That behavior sometimes is not the right attitude, but I think in cases like this where it's so damn important, we definitely have to put our feet down and keep at it. Keep at the assault, keep at the communication towards Sony, and make sure that they decide one way or the other. I'm just surprised to see so many outlets that do have those relationships with Sony standing with us in this issue, because it is a risk to put yourself out there and jeopardize the relationships that you do have with those companies, or those people, or those faces. But in an age where Sony started off really great and played it very well with their consumer welfare for their product this console generation, generating a lot of goodwill among players, it's very surprising to see that they're kind of willing to just burn it all down to the ground. They want all gamers out there to be locked in to the Sony environment only for playing games. But for the growth and stability of this industry's most competitive online games, it is essential that crossplay is integrated among all consoles to make sure that games do have the ability to prosper and thrive well after they're released, and to make sure that the experiences of gamers are not isolated and monetarily fragmented off just for the sake of one company. So is Sony burning bridges, or is this entire situation just going to get glossed over and forgotten about in the coming weeks? You guys let me know down below in the comment section. I really appreciate you watching my video and commenting. You guys are awesome. Take care and have a great day. We'll see you guys in our next video. Peace, love, and happiness until then.